Welcome to the Graduate Job Podcast, your home for weekly information and inspiration to help you get the graduate job of your dreams.
Hello and welcome to the Graduate Job Podcast with your host, James Curran. The Graduate Job Podcast is your home for all things related to helping you on your journey to find that amazing job. Each episode I bring together the best minds in the industry, speaking to leading authors, graduate recruiters and career coaches who bring decades of experience into a bite-sized weekly 30-minute-ish show. Put simply, this is a show I wish I had when I graduated. And thank you for joining me for the 87th episode of the Graduate Job Podcast, where I'm recording this from an island off the coast of Cambodia. I might be a long way away, but I've got a very special guest on the show today, a man who needs no introduction to regular listeners of the podcast. It's a one and only best-selling author, John Lees, who joins us to talk about everything you need to do to get ahead when you do get a graduate job. We delve into John's new book and explore what you should, and more importantly, should not do in your first 100 days of your new graduate job. We explore exactly why the first 100 days of your new graduate job are so crucial and why how you perform here could impact your career going forward. We cover the induction period and why you should accept the fact that it's probably not going to be as comprehensive as you were promised. We examine the key mistakes that new graduates make when they join a firm and what you need to do to avoid them. We probe the topic of communication and why listening and effectively communicating with senior people will set you on the path to career success. We also cover the difference between active and passive behaviours and why embracing active behaviours will allow you to stand out from your peers. No matter where you are on your job search, if you've just landed your first graduate job or you're still applying, this is an episode which you aren't going to want to miss. Now, the only link you need to remember from today is graduatejobpodcast.com/getahead, as that has all the links to everything which we discuss and a full transcript which you can download, so make sure you're heading over there. Now, before we start, let's have a little message from today's sponsor, who are our friends at careergym.com. Now, there's some things in life, unfortunately, you can't escape, and psychometric tests when you apply for a graduate job is one of them. Career Gym is the number one place for you to undertake all of your psychometric tests which you'll face when you apply for a graduate job. And the bottom line is that no matter which graduate job you apply for, from the global giants to that small company around the corner, you're going to have to do some type of verbal and numerical reasoning, situational judgment and working style tests. At careergym.com you can practice all of these, and they come with detailed explanations, and you can compare yourself against your peers or do them under time pressure. And as a valued listener of the show, they will give you 20% off all of their tests if you use the code GJP. That's GJP. So head on over to careergym.com, that's careergym.com, and use the code GJP to get 20% off all of their tests and start practicing today. Now on with the show. Welcome back to the Graduate Job Podcast, a man with a velvety voice who needs no introduction, best-selling author of umpteen career classics, including the brilliant How to Get a Job You'll Love, Knockout Interviews, and Cracking the Success Code, to name just a few. John, welcome back to the show.
It's great to be with you.
And today we're going to explore your latest book, which I really enjoyed, which is Get Ahead in Your New Job. Links to which you'll be able to find over in the show notes at graduatejobpodcast.com/getahead. Now, John, your other books focus on how to get a graduate job, but this one really takes it a step further and focuses on how to be a success in the first 100 days. Now, why do you think this is so important to new graduates?
Well, the first 100 days classically is that cut-off point where organizations make a decision about you, which surprises some people. But we work in a culture where decisions are made about people really fast in terms of whether they're likely to be success or failures. And the reason it's important to graduates is that often this is the key time for mapping your way into the organization, establishing key relationships, and working out where your learning pathways are going to be. So it's not always just about hitting the deck running. It's sometimes about working out how the job is going to shape up for you.
No, definitely. And I was surprised by the stat in the book that only 12% of employees say their employer does a good job of onboarding them. So for graduates who are applying for that shiny graduate scheme with all the impressive blurb in their promotional materials, I think they might be surprised at just how poor a job their respective companies are actually going to do.
Well, I mean, we don't want to overegg this, but because clearly there are some organisations doing really good graduate trainee programs, but there's quite a lot of data out there that suggests that induction programs are being reduced in terms of timing and funding, and in some organisations seem to be disappearing altogether. And you can understand why, because if the philosophy is we really want to hire people who are job ready and we want them to get on with the job straight away, then the traditional model of easing them in gently is going to disappear. I mean, it really breaks down these kind of assumptions about passive assumptions about what organizations are going to do for people. So because the induction model really encourages passivity. It's almost like a classroom model that says we'll show you around, we'll introduce you to all of these different departments, we'll give you lots of familiarization, and then we'll kind of gradually ease you into your new role. Now, if that's what you expect, then the work may well be a shock for people, both at graduate level and later.
Yeah, and thinking when I started my graduate scheme, it was a really formal 3-week period. You know, it was 2 weeks at an offsite with all the new graduates, and they, you know, sheet dip you through all the different bits of the knowledge that you needed to know about the company, and then you had a week abroad at the company's sort of university campus. It was it was a really thorough induction. But speaking today to one of the clients I coached who started their new graduate job just 2 weeks ago, he was saying that, you know, his induction hasn't been as promised. You know, the person who's meant to be running it has been away, so he's just felt all alone. You know, there is big differences between companies. And what would you recommend in the example I gave there for someone who, you know, the induction's not been as promised when you get there? You know, any tips for people to so they can you know, make a start?
Well, I think recommend to people that they work on the basis that induction training won't be there, because if it is, that's an added bonus. But if it isn't, you've kind of got your rescue kit ready, and that's to do that. It really, think about this as a kind of an exercise to say, how would you do this entirely on your own? Well, what you would probably do would be to have important check-in conversations with anybody that looks like a line manager or anybody that influences your role. You'd also check in with colleagues and team members to understand how your job impacts on theirs and the problems that you're there to solve. And you work out some of the other key people in the organization, the people I call blockers and brokers and enablers and ambassadors. So it's those categories of people that really will make a big difference to whether you make some kind of a success in the opening couple of months.
Yep, and you mentioned the information brokers, blockers, and enablers there. We'll delve into that in a bit of detail a bit later on in the interview.
Great.
So one thing I really like from the book is you talk about, you know, how the self-promotion skills that graduate job seekers have been employing in their job search often aren't appropriate and can be counterproductive when they actually get the job. Why do you think that is the case?
What you often hear from recruiters is the phrase, how you look for a job influences the way you are seen when you start it. So if you are really over promoting yourself, you're overselling your skills and your strengths, maybe you've gone in too hard and you're over promising and likely to under deliver, then those are all things that are going to impact on your performance. And if you think about it, the day before you start, what do people know about you? Well, the main thing they know about you is what's going through the rumor mill as a result of the last interview you had in the organization. You may have had some kind of preliminary visit and somebody knows something about you from that. But the first impression that you make as a result of the selection process is a really important one, because it sets up all kinds of expectations. And the expectation might be that you're lacking in confidence. The expectation might be that you've got too much confidence, you're too cocky. It might be that a big concern that you have taught your way into the job, but you really don't have enough knowledge of the organisation to do well in it. So it's always good to think about, well, what messages have I got across in order to get this job, and now what work do I need to do to reinvent myself as I arrive.
I can remember when we've had new graduates joining the team, and they really come in and just try and almost again give themselves a big sell. And I can remember just thinking, well, look, you don't really need to do that. You've joined the firm. Trust that you're good enough. You don't have to try and, it's not an interview. You don't have to try and sell yourself to me. Let's just get on and do the job. So, there is a definite switch in mindset in terms of how they portray themselves and want to be seen.
That's right.
And you talk as well about the importance of listening when you start a new job. Again, why is this so crucial in the beginning phase?
Well, it sounds really obvious, doesn't it? But it is, again, something which new hires often mix, because if you think about it, the expectation has been given to them. The expectation has been set that they're going to hit the ground running. So in other words, start delivering, start performing, start talking. Now, the other way round is actually much more effective for a little while, because what you're doing is you're absorbing culture, you're working out where the danger areas are, you're working out what the codes are of the organization in terms of the stuff you have to conform with, and you're also working out whose toes you're treading on, because there's all kinds of danger areas in a new job. So the thing about listening is not just learning the job, it's not just listening in order to absorb the task, it's listening to absorb the environment and the culture and the politics and the emotional dynamics of a team. And one of the best ways of doing that is to ask great questions about what's already working well. And that really helps if people think that you see yourself as the kind of solution to all of life's problems. If your approach is to say, I'm really enjoying finding out more about these recent activities, these projects. In other words, picking up on what is already going really well, that signals that you're learning in a different way, and you're learning as part of a joint contribution. You're seeing yourself as a team member rather than as an outsider.
No, I think that's a really good point. And you can't go wrong from just paying attention and asking good quality questions of people. It's always a good way to impress people from the beginning. You do mention in the book, though, one exception is when you meet someone senior and you need to switch to interview mode again. Why do you think this is the case with more senior people?
Well, because senior people make decisions about new hires really quickly. You might have met them in the hiring process, in which case they may have formed a kind of almost a cartoon picture, whether you're a good thing or an average thing. But the first time they see you in work context, and that could be just talking to you in the lift, they're again doing that rapid filtering process. I mean, there's a lot of data that supports this. There's the whole thing about the setup to fail syndrome. There's lots of research about the way senior managers make early decisions about new hires. And a senior manager might be second guessing their own decision to hire you, or more likely in a graduate context, just thinking about what the graduate recruitment department, the graduate hirers in the organization are doing at the moment, and are they bringing in good people? So just to say to somebody like that, well, I'm absorbing, I'm learning, I'm listening, is a little bit quiet, a little bit passive. It's sometimes good to show some excitement about what you discovered, ask a great question, maybe about the sort of strategic level decision making, and talk about what you're doing, talk about what you're already adding to the business.
I remember when I was a new graduate, someone gave me the advice that because there was 2 intakes a year, so every 6 months, and they said, look, for 6 months you're the new graduates, so use this opportunity to ask any questions, make sure you're speaking to people, you can go and introduce yourself to anybody, because you've got carte blanche to do that at the beginning, and you can't be doing it a year down the line. You can certainly be doing it in the first the first 100 days.
But even in sorry to interrupt, but even in the first 100 days, you can come across as slightly too naive if the questions you ask are too basic. So in other words, if you could have answered that question by spending 30 seconds looking at the company's website, why wasting somebody's time just picking up sort of really basic information?
Yep.
So it is smart and positive-minded questions tend to work much better.
Yep. You mentioned a moment ago about being too passive when you start. Can you expand on the difference between passive and active behaviours when you start a new job?
Well, it's easy to be passive because work can look like an extension of full-time education where you are processed and you're going to be moved along. And I'm sure, James, you and I meet a lot of graduates who really do expect that they're going to be packaged and processed in that way, rather like organizations were doing 30 or 40 years ago. So you're going to be taken through an extended induction process and then put onto a learning and development plan, and maybe even in the style of the old-fashioned graduate training program, allowed to move around lots of different departments until you settle down. Well, modern working reality indicates that you're hired in order to perform, and you're expected to deliver something pretty much straight away. Clearly, you're not going to have all the knowledge of that's required by the job, and your skills are still in development. But you're going to be expected to do something, even if it's work with application and enthusiasm and with energy and diligently. So the passive thing is kind of waiting for something to happen to you. The active model is to say, how can I start to make a difference and start to be visible from my very first week in the new role?
Yeah, and going back to the client I was coaching who started his job 2 weeks ago. So as of next week, so week 3, he's already going to be got sales targets to hit. So it's quite a sales role, sales focused role. So in week 3, he's expected to be hitting the ground running and being seen to bring in cash to the company. So yeah, straight from the beginning, as you said, people want to see you making an impact.
Yeah, definitely.
We talked earlier about briefly about the concept of brokers, blockers, and enablers. Can you explain what these are in more detail and why they are important?
Sure. So brokers, to start with, brokers are people that broker information. So, and they're not necessarily the senior people. It might be the managing director's PA. It might even be somebody in IT or somebody in accounts or somebody on security. But what they do is they control access to information, and if they feel favorably disposed towards you, they share that information with you. So they can give you shortcuts, they can tell you the right person to talk to, they can alert you to trips and traps mechanisms that are going to get in your way, like what happens if you submit something a day late or you fail to pre-order something. But that's why brokers are really important. You often have to be really nice to them and to ask their advice, and sometimes flatter them a little bit. But once they understand that you appreciate their help and you're not going to constantly ask them stupid questions, they tend to be very, very helpful. Blockers are very different, because what they do, perhaps by instinct, is to block access to information, perhaps because of silo mentality or their working style. And it's good to know who they are, because sometimes you might be depending on somebody to give you a piece of information. Let's say you can't complete a report without it, and it's their normal working pattern not to do that on time and on target. So when you discover people like that, sometimes you work on the relationship to get them to cooperate with you a little bit more, and sometimes you work around them and find a broker who will give you the same access to information. Enablers are a bit like that, but what they're actually doing is opening doors for you, as the word would suggest. They tend to introduce you to other people, to introduce you to projects, to feed you with information and ideas and resources. So they become part of your learning, really. And it's great to cultivate those people, even if they're not formally mentors to you. And one of the ways of doing that is sharing information with them. So if you discover something interesting inside or outside the organization, and it's, again, not too basic, it looks useful, you think that'll be of assistance, then passing it on means that through the natural kind of process of fair exchange, you'll get something back. And ambassadors are really a slightly more sophisticated kind of level, maybe for when you've been in an organization for 12 months or more, where you possibly thinking about a mentor, you're thinking about people who are going to be champions for you in the future, thinking people who are going to not just open doors, but perhaps mention your name at a senior level. And this is one of the ways, when you talk to people who've got to board level in organizations, they will usually reflect back on the way that they have identified people who are information brokers and enablers and champions or ambassadors, if you like, people who actually have argued their case or promoted their visibility internally.
I love the three things there, well, the four things there, and very true. I mean, I know with the brokers are just so important, and in my experience, the PAs tend to be the real power brokers in most offices. And if you can get on side with some of the senior PAs, they can make everything just so much smoother for you. Many of them tend to have been there a long time. They know who to speak to for everything. So any questions you've got, they can really help. And also they just have the finger on the pulse, so they know things that are going on before you will. And also, as you said, if you can make friends with an IT person, they will be worth their weight in gold, because you're not going to be able to do much unless your computer and everything is working. So if you can keep those people sweet, then that's definitely going to help your career.
Absolutely.
And it wasn't until I was probably a while into my first graduate job where I sort of realised the importance of ambassadors, and you definitely see in the firms people taking their sort of people who've worked with them as they progress through the career, really pulling people along, as some people went up the ranks very quickly, the people that they trusted and they knew they could depend on working on projects would then just get pulled along with them, quick promotions. So if you can, you can identify the people who are going places nice and early, then it's definitely going to help your career. I liked your point in the book about the importance of learning the local language of the new firm. How would you advise listeners to maybe go about doing this?
In a way, it's an extension of the process of getting hired, because strong candidates tend to learn to speak the language of the organization they're going to. So they learn to describe their strengths and their own experience and background in terms that the organization not only understands but finds exciting. When you're in the role, it's an extension of that. So you're starting to pick up the terminology that's used, and I'm not just talking in terms of jargon and technical stuff. I'm talking about the way organizations describe things like team working and cooperation and targets and goals and results. It's a shared language, and using that language demonstrates that you're starting to become one of the tribe. I think there's a great deal that's tribal about work, and tribes are very ancient parts of human history, and we tend to behave differently towards people that we consider to be part of the same tribe, and slightly more negatively and more cautiously to people that we think are either in a different tribe or on the edge of the tribe. So if you have that model in mind and you think, what do I need to do to become part of this tribe? That's not about conformity and behaving and wearing the same things as everybody else, but it is often about tuning in to language and behaviours as well, not just language, but behaviours too. So, for example, if you're, as a relatively new member of a team, coming in 5 minutes later than everybody else, that as a tribal behaviour, that may be perfectly acceptable and everybody's relaxed about that, but you may be pointing a big spotlight at yourself, saying this is somebody that doesn't get it, doesn't understand.
No, I really like the analogy of the tribe, and you mentioned about dress code and things. Last company I was working at, the dress code that 99% of all the men had was sort of chinos and shirt, no tie, no jacket, and it's just uniform, just what everybody just wore. If someone came in with a suit, you could immediately tell they were either very senior or they were more likely to be a sort of management consultant. So it's important to get on top of what those are. And sort of expanding then from the tribe analogy, and thinking about the culture of a firm. I mean, how important is it to get up to speed with the culture of a firm, particularly maybe the hidden cultures? What should people be looking for?
Well, again, interestingly, culture is one of the things that really pays to find out about before you even accept a job, but it's something you can't always discover directly. So I never recommend people say in a job interview, what is the organizational culture like? Because the answer you get comes from a public relations angle and not from position of honesty. You can sometimes understand things about culture from the turnover of an organization and how long people have stayed there. When you arrive, if you discover that you're working with people who have been around for 5-7 years or more and they're still motivated and energized and seem to be enjoying parts of their job, then the culture is probably working. So sometimes you pick up clues about how long people stay in a particular division or department or within the organization as a whole. The operating culture is often also about understanding how organizations monitor and view success. So that starts to feed into whatever an appraisal system looks like, how the organization chooses to progress some people and not others, and what's going on behind that. So there is a lot to decode, but the biggest clues are often to do with retention and how far people are motivated to do what they're doing.
No, that's I'd not thought of it that way, and it's a really good point. And I thinking back to some of the places I've worked, and like you mentioned there, how do people who've been there sort of 5-7 years, how motivated are they? And I can think of some workplaces I've been where people who were sort of 5-7 years in were certainly not motivated, which says a lot about the different workplaces. So that's a good way to look at it. And office politics is an unavoidable part of most jobs. What advice would you give a new graduate starting a company to navigate this minefield?
Well, I think you've got to tread very carefully and to resist the temptation to mirror, copy negative behaviours, because that's an easy form of acceptance. So joining a faction, being difficult with somebody because other team members are difficult, being part of information blocking, that's a rather unwise and early form of connivance, really. It's much better to spot the varieties of behaviours and office politics that you see, and where you find teams and managers who are much more positive, where the culture is more honest and healthier, then it's sometimes a good idea to gravitate towards them, particularly if you find yourself in a slightly toxic environment. It's a poor assumption to think this immediate context is unhelpful, a little bit backbiting, so I need to just get out and find another job somewhere else, because you do need to look very carefully to say, is this as a result of one individual manager or one team or one department? And in our organizations, it's interesting to see how there are a variety of contexts where office politics is more or less prevalent, and sometimes office politics is just simply an expression of competitiveness, and it's relatively acceptable, and sometimes it is destructive because it does actually get in the way of delivering things which move individuals and the organisation forward.
Yep, and looking back over my career, I have company to company, it does change so much. In my most recent role, I was working with quite senior people, and there wasn't any office politics at all. It was just everyone just came in, did their job well, and went home, and there was just nothing. But then looking back, thinking to other companies where it was just all pervasive, and it wasn't a nice place to work. So yeah, it really does change within on a department, team by team basis, depending on
it does.
who the
and I think early understanding of that is very helpful, because it can actually get in the way of an individual's career. Because if the net result of this is that teams are underproductive, or whole departments are seen as unhelpful or negative, and you can end up sidelined in a part of the organization which has fairly low visibility and low impact, and that doesn't provide great experiences to be putting into the first 10 years of your career.
Yeah, no, completely. So, John, there is so much good stuff in the book that we haven't even touched upon, but unfortunately, time is running away with us. So maybe one final question. We've covered a lot so far in the interview, but maybe do you have one final top tip for graduates listening so they can hit the ground running in the first 100 days?
I would say take control over your own learning, really. Work out what really matters to the organization, where you think you can probably make a difference within 3 months, and what you need to learn quickly in order to do that. And that could be about shadowing somebody, picking up a new set of skills. It could be about doing some homework. It could be about go away and studying something privately. But yeah, take control of your own learning, and that's likely to have a really big impact in terms of the way that you're seen.
Brilliant. No, that's brilliant advice. So, John, let's move on to the quick fire part of the show. So let's start with one top book tip that you recommend to the listeners.
Well, yeah, I'm going to recommend a book that I'm ordering today, because I'm getting really interested this year in the impact of artificial intelligence and automation in work. So there's a writer called Daniel Susskind, who's an academic, and he's just got a book out this month called A World Without Work: Technology, Automation, and How We Should Respond. So I'm going to be dipping into that the next couple of days, and that, I think that's the sort of book we should all be reading, really, to try to get a handle on how work is going to be changing over the next 5 years or so.
No, that sounds fascinating, and I know you touch on AI stuff, and you think, that's not possibly going to impact my job, but it's gonna touch on many jobs. So, listeners, it's definitely, if you're thinking about your career over the next 40, 50 years, it's going to play a big role. So, definitely worth maybe getting up to speed on it now. So, good recommendation there, John. So next, what internet resource would you point listeners to?
Well, there are, of course, loads out there, but again, something that's caught my attention this week is some really exciting blogs that have been put out very recently by an organization called Career Shifters. So careershifters.org. There's some great blogs there, and what I like about the organization is that they are really good at encouraging people to be imaginative about career change, but also equally good at being action focused in terms of the practical next steps that they need to do in order to make some kind of a change happen.
Oh, brilliant. I've not come across that one, so I'll check that out today. So all the links to everything and a full transcript to today's episode you'll be able to find in the show notes at graduatejobpodcast.com/getahead. So, John, it's been an absolute pleasure having you back on the show. Where can listeners find out more about you and also more about the book?
Oh, the books are all covered alongside my work at www.johnleescareers.com.
Excellent. And listeners will be heavily plugged with lots of nice big links to it over in the show notes. So check out the show notes there. John, thank you so much for coming on the show.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Many thanks as always to John for coming on the show. So much good advice for you how you can ensure that you get off to a flyer when you start your graduate job. Make sure you check out the show notes at graduatejobpodcast.com/getahead, which has links to everything we discussed and a full transcript you can download. Do make sure you subscribe to the show through whichever means you listen to the podcast. We have some cracking episodes coming up, including next week's with psychometric testing website Job Test Prep, who share exactly what you need to be doing to pass any psychometric test you will face. It's a cracker. If you have any questions, comments, or if you would like some one-on-one coaching to help you with your graduate job applications, interviews, or assessment centres, drop me a line at hello@graduatejobpodcast.com. I look forward to hearing from you. All that remains to say is I hope you enjoyed the episode today, but more importantly, I hope you use it and apply it. See you next week.